In previous section, you learned how to make a simple list and you learned to work with the individual elements in a list. And in this section, you will learn how to loop through an entire list using just a few lines of code, regardless of how long the list is. So looping allows you to take the same action or set of actions with every item in a list. As a result, you will be able to work efficiently with a list of any length, and including those with thousands or even millions of items. So you will often want to run through all entries in a list, performing the same task with each item. For example, in game, you might want to move every element on the screen by the same amount. In a list of numbers, you might want to perform the same statistical operation on every element. Or perhaps you will want to display each headline from a list of articles on a website. So when you want to do the same action with every item in a list, you can use Python's for loop. So let's say we have a list of magicians' names and we want to print out each name in the list. We could do this by retrieving each name from the list individually, but this approach will cause several problems. For one, it will be repetitive to do this with a long list of names. Also, we'd have to change our code each time the list length changed. So using a for loop avoids both of these uses by letting Python manage these uses internally. So let's use for loop to print out each name in list of car models or car makers. So car makers here, and we will use the BMW, or Kia here, Ford, Dodge here, Dodge, and we will also use, for example, BMW, Kia, Mercedes, or it was, yes, Mercedes, and Volkswagen, and so on. So now that's enough actually. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on index and 6 items. So we begin by defining list, and now we will write our for loop. So for cars or makers, you can do here makers. You will understand what these makers or cars are. Instead of using makers plural, we can use one here. So car in car makers, and after that we will use double dot here, and we will print the car. That's it. So now I will explain all of this code here. So we begin by defining a list, just the regular list, just as we did in previous lectures. And as you can see here, it's car makers. So let's, instead of using red, I can also use another color here. So we define the list of car makers, and here the next we tell Python here, and also firstly we have for loop. Look at this. So this line tells the Python to pull a name from the from the car makers and associate it with the variable car, right? So, and next we tell the Python to print the name that has been assigned to car here. So here, as you can see here, we printed each of line this BMW, Kia, Ford, Dodge, Mercedes, and BMW in separate print functions here. So, and Python repeats these last two lines once for each name in the list. It might help to read this code as for every car maker in the list of car makers, print the car maker's name, right? So the output is going to be this, as you see here. So now let's take a closer look at this loop here. So looping is important because it's one of the most ways a computer automates repetitive tasks. For example, in a simple loop like we used in this Python here. So Python initially reads the first line of the loop, which is for car in car makers. So this tells Python to retrieve the first value from the list car makers and associate it with the variable car, right? So this first value is here BMW, and Python creates the new line here, and Python prints the current value of the car makers, which is BMW, because the list contains more value. So, and the Python returns to the line of the first loop. So now Python retrieves the next name in the list, which is Kia here, Kia, and associates with the value with the variable magician. So here we have firstly in first loop here we had BMW, secondly we had Kia here, in third loop we had Ford, and here Python prints the current value of car again, which is now here, right? And Python repeats the entire loop once more with the last value in the list. In this case, Ford, and then Dodge, Mercedes, and lastly Volkswagen. And after that, we are ending this loop, and here we printed all the loop. So when you are using loops for the first time, keep in mind that the set of steps is repeated once for each item in the list. So no matter how many times items are in the list. So if you have 1,000,000 items in your list, Python repeats these steps 1,000,000 times, and usually very quickly. And also keep in mind when writing your own for loops that you can choose any name you want for the temporary variable that will associate it with each value in the list. You can do, for example, my car make or so on. And of course you have to change the my car make here. That's it. However, it's helpful to choose the meaningful name that represents a single item from the list. For example, instead of doing cars here, writing this for cars in car makers, or for dogs in dogs, you can write for dog in dogs here, or for cat in cats, because this first item represents just one item, but here this represents the list in this case. The naming conventions can help you follow the action being done on each item within a for loop. Using a singular and plural names can help you identify whether a section of code is working with a single element from the list or the entire list.